Hello, hello. A very warm welcome in to Raising the Dots, a monthly podcast connecting you with the people, ideas and technology shaping the world of Braille and tactile literacy. I'm your host, Dave Williams. Fantastic to be with you once again. Coming up this time on Raising the Dots, we'll be learning more about the JAWS for Windows screen reader support for multiline Braille devices, including DotPad X. And we'll also be speaking with Professor John Ravenscroft of Edinburgh University about his work in the education of visually impaired children. That's all to come this time on Raising the Dots. Before we get started this month, I want to extend my personal thanks to each and every one of you who have tuned in and fed back about our first 3 episodes. The response has been overwhelming. Thank you. We appreciate you. Please continue to like, share, and stay subscribed to Raising the Dots for more news and views about the world of Braille and tactile technology. And if you have a question or a comment or a suggestion, or you'd like to feedback or something you want to hear on Raising the Dots, well, I'd love to hear from you. Why not drop me a line? The email address is info@dottingcorp.com. That's info at dottingcorp, that's dottincorp.com. And we look forward to your emails. In September 2025, the JAWS for Windows screen reader introduced support for multiline Braille, including support for the DotPad. And you heard about that, of course, here on Raising the Dots last month. However, I felt it was time that we dug a little bit deeper. So we are joined by Joseph Stephen, who is a software engineer with Vispero. Welcome in, Joe.
G'day, and thank you.
So that wasn't the accent people were expecting to hear. You're in Australia.
Yes, I'm in Tasmania, surrounded by thousands of acres of forest.
Alrighty, and we are also joined again by Dot's technical support manager, Gary Redfern-Gray. Welcome back, Gary.
Hi, glad to be here again.
All right, a question for both of you just before we get into this. As blind software developers both, why do you think blind people need multiline Braille? Joe?
That's like asking a sighted person why you need a screen. Surely you can just cope with a 20-cell or 20-character display, can't you? Like a calculator display? Imagine going back to the calculator, the days of the calculator display, the one-line display. For me, going to multiline Braille was like going from a calculator display to a screen. It is totally life-changing. It's the holy grail of Braille.
Absolutely. And again, when you edit any document or when you look at text where the detail matters, and it always does when you're writing code, having more of that Braille under your fingers is, for me, the game changer, because you're not panning every few characters to get the whole context of what you're reading.
Joe, can you take us back to the design decision? Why support for multiline Braille became a priority for the 2025 release? Why is this now the moment for multiline?
Well, the hardware started becoming available. We actually started developing for multiline Braille anticipating that it was going to happen 3 or 4 years ago, but we didn't have the hardware to test it on, and so we sort of kept it under wraps, and the moment came and we were able to reveal what we had been developing.
And from an engineering perspective, what were some of the biggest technical challenges that you had to overcome when adding multiline Braille support for a screen reader, which, let's face it, as JAWS celebrates 30 years, and you've been working on JAWS for most of that time, JAWS was never really designed for multiline Braille, right? So what did you have to do?
That's a really good question. Someone said to us, why don't you just make it a single line driver that says it's, 160 characters long. It's It's nothing like that. It is so complicated because what we have to do is we have to decide, first of all, in multiple applications, how to gather the text. So we will gather paragraph by paragraph until the display is full. Then we have to track where did we get to in that paragraph so that when you pan, it knows where to move the cursor in the document to start regathering text to fill the next lot of the display. But that's only in wrapped mode. We also added logic so that in spreadsheets and tables, we can vertically align numerical data, which is absolutely phenomenal. So you can literally fill the numbers in a column vertically aligned on the right if it's numeric data, or on the left if it's text. And you can add up your figures. You can see the spreadsheet exactly as a sighted person would see it, and it formats it on the fly.
Just previous to that, in spreadsheets, what you'd see is what's in a single cell. So it's back to that whole kind of, how would it be if you were looking at a spreadsheet as a sighted person, but you could only see one cell at a time? And that's always been the case with single line Braille. With multi-line Braille, being able to see several cells in a column intelligently and then be able to pan to the next column so that you can actually absorb that data and actually understand the data in much the way as a sighted person would, it is fantastic. Yeah, and definitely kudos to Jaws for making that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, for a student, half the battle is not just dealing with the data, but dealing with memorizing context. Like you said, in the single line days, you couldn't look at the cell above without panning to it, and then you'd forget what was in the row beneath where you just were. You had to have such a phenomenal memory, whereas now you can just put one finger on the line above and one finger on the current line, one finger on the next line, quickly look over at the next column, even in the prior row, whatever. And you can see the titles as well. So the titles of the columns remain visible on the display as you arrow down the column. So you've always got context. So it really helps if you don't have a super memory like most people don't.
We have these concepts of wrapped and cropped mode. So wrapped reflows text, whereas cropped aims to preserve that vertical alignment as you described, Joe. How does JAWS decide which one to use?
Great question. So you can manually choose. So if you go into a document in Microsoft Word, you can manually choose from the set Braille view options whether you're seeing wrapped or cropped mode. But also when you arrow into a table, whether it's in Word or on the web, or you focus on Excel, it will automatically switch to cropped mode because it will detect that you're in a table and it will reflow or reformat the content appropriately.
Can you describe how split Braille now works on multi-line displays?
Yes, so split Braille was introduced to help solve that memory issue. You say you want to compare two products on the web, and you had to, literally Alt-tab between two browser pages and memorize and have the speech read it, then go back to the other page. Now what you can do is split the display. So say you've got 8 lines of real estate on your Braille display. You could use the top half of the display for one lot of data and the bottom half of the display for another lot of data. So what you could do is you go to the website, you find the article, you can buffer that on half the display, then Alt-tab to your live article, and you can read them, and you can read them simultaneously. You can pan through them independently, so you can have your left hand in the live context and the right hand in the buffered context, and literally compare them in real time.
Just that whole panning independently again is really, really good. So having a Braille display that's big enough to accommodate split Braille like that, so several lines of Braille for each part, but then also being able to pan it independently, it's absolutely fantastic.
When you come to support a new multi-line display, how do you address the whole issue of navigation and what the buttons are all going to do?
Well, it depends. So if the display supports the HID interface, You don't really need to add any key maps or anything because it will just work from in JAWS 2026. But if it doesn't yet support HID, then you have to add a key map, which we do in the process of signing the driver. And we will decide what are the most common functions that a blind user needs to be able to access from the Braille display. So panning keys obviously need to move through the document. You may need dot combinations that invoke certain functions of JAWS. Does the display have enough keys to do Braille input? So we have to look at all these factors and decide what's the most important thing that a blind person would need to be able to do from the Braille display without having to put their hands back on the main keyboard.
In your view, what productivity gains or new workflows does Multiline Braille enable?
Programming is really great, especially in languages where you need to be able to vertically align things or indent things, and the code actually depends on it, like Python. But even just regular reading, it's so much more efficient when you can read more than 20 characters at a time. You can read faster, particularly when you're presenting. If you've just got more content in front of you, you can look back, you can look forward. You don't have to pan as much. It's not as stilted because you've just got more content in front of you, which is just really, really important.
The other thing that I'd like to mention is music. So I'm a musician. I've been speaking to musicians who've seen music displayed on DotPad. And when I show musicians a score on the DotPad, and here's a score, it's laid out as it would be on paper. You can go from page to page. It's all nicely formatted. People are really amazed at that, and including myself. I can sit down at the piano with my DotPad, learn music. And because, again, I have the context of Multiline Braille, I'm able to understand that score and learn from it much easier than had it been a single line Braille display.
You're absolutely right. I mean, there's not a single discipline where multi-line Braille doesn't add productivity.
We're still quite early, really, on this journey with multi-line Braille and JAWS. What initial feedback have you received so far from early adopters?
I've had several messages say that this is life-changing. Why would anyone go back to a single line display once they had multi-line? And I would concur.
Looking ahead, what enhancements or refinements do you envision for JAWS and multi-line Braille?
Personally, I would love to see JAWS support graphics. So, for instance, I had a few ideas like being able to provide script functions for scripters to be able to draw lines and circles or draw mathematical functions so you could graph things, use AI to better represent complex images, things like that. I mean, the horizon is limitless, and it just requires that blind people provide that feedback that, yes, this is actually important to us. We need to be able to use graphics with JAWS. So I'd strongly encourage, people who are users of the DotPad or the Monarch or whatever multi-line Braille display you're using to provide that feedback, because obviously we do our planning based on feedback.
If a blind user listening to this were to switch from single line displays to a multi-line display and JAWS, what hints or tips would you offer them to get the most out of that experience?
I don't think they'd need any tips, really. I think once you feel it and you feel how much content you've got and how you can pan rapidly through documents, and it's literally perfectly continuous moving forward through the document, it's just intuitive. I mean, the learning curve is in a sense simpler with multi-line than it is with single line, because you have to pan less and you don't have to be able to micromanage the cursor as much.
And I'd absolutely agree with that. I mean, I think if you're a Braille user, particularly if you're a single line Braille user, and as soon as you see multi-line, you immediately get it. And particularly when you're in a document, the fact that JAWS is doing all all that great stuff around deciding what text should be on the display, all that. The fact that it will automatically switch into cropped mode when you're on a table, so you don't need to do that. It's just a really, really good experience.
Yeah, there's probably only one tip that actually comes to mind, and that is on a single line display, it's really hard to lose the cursor. But on a multi-line display, all of a sudden you've got 8 lines where the cursor might be. At least on the dot pad, what we're doing is we're using the 20 cell area at the bottom for status information, and we show the line, the physical line of the display and the physical column of the display where the cursor is. So if you can't find the cursor quickly, you can look it down at the status line and then feel that, you know, your cursor's on line 3, column 5, and then you can quickly locate it. Because with multi-line Braille, we don't flash the cursor at the moment. We may do on the next iteration of the dot pad if the refresh rate's fast enough, but typically with multi-line Braille, the refresh rate's not quite fast enough to blink the cursor, so we leave it statically up.
Well, this has been great, guys. Is there anything I've not asked you that you wanted to add before we ask where listeners can learn more?
I'm just really grateful that companies like Dot Inc. and APH and others have actually taken, bitten the bullet and developed multi-line Braille. I hope that we can bring it down in price so it's more achievable or reachable by blind folk, and I think over time that will happen. But I'm just really thankful that people have had the vision to make this a reality. As I started out, it's the holy grail of Braille.
And likewise, I'm really grateful and pleased that Vispero have put the work in to make multi-line Braille accessible via JAWS, because it's always a chicken and egg situation, isn't it? If you have the hardware but you don't have the software to do the integration, then customers aren't going to use it, and then software makers are going to not want to keep developing it. But now we have DotPad working with several screen readers. The fact that means it's accessible to customers. It's really coming together, and I look forward to what is next down the road.
Yeah, collaboration is always a really, really important thing between screen reader developers and hardware developers, and I'm really grateful that this collaboration, particularly this time round, has just been phenomenally efficient.
Where can listeners learn more about multi-line Braille support in JAWS?
JAWS does have a help system which is quite comprehensive. It also has the FS Companion where you can ask a question and it will tell you using AI what features are available. And I believe that there will probably be tutorials and webinars and things like that available soon to promote multi-line use in JAWS.
Gary, anyone interested in using JAWS with DotPad X, where can we do that?
You can go to our website at dotincorp.com.
Excellent. Joe, Stephen, Gary Redfern, great. Thank you so much for joining us here on Raising the Dots.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Our thanks again to Joe and everybody at Vispero for all your work to push the envelope when it comes to Braille and tactile literacy. We really appreciate all your efforts. And if you are using JAWS for Windows with a multi-line Braille display, then we'd love to hear from you. How is it? What are you using it for? What would you like to see next? Do let us know. Our email address, should you wish to get in contact, it's info@dotincorp.com. Now, earlier this year, I was lucky enough to attend the Tactile Literacy Conference in Amsterdam, where I caught up with Professor John Ravenscroft, an academic working in the field of childhood visual impairment. I'm with Professor John Ravenscroft from Edinburgh University. Welcome into the podcast, John. Fantastic to have your company. And I think it would be helpful for listeners just to learn a little bit about you, because you've had a varied, I'm not going to say checkered, but you've had quite an interesting journey. You've edited a journal. You're involved with ICEVI, and of course you work at the university. Just share with listeners a bit about your role in the education of blind and visually impaired students.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Dave, and it's great to be on the podcast. So like you say, I'm Professor John Ravenscroft, and my chair is in childhood visual impairment, and I'm from the School of Education. So I'm a psychologist and I'm not a medic. And in my role, I am the director of the Scottish Sensory Centre. And the Scottish Sensory Centre provides professional development, professional learning for all teachers, classroom assistants, parents, anyone who is involved in the education of children with visual impairment and in hearing impairment, but I particularly obviously of course focus on childhood and vision impairment. So that's what I do at the university. I work with my colleague Elizabeth McCann, who runs the TVI program, who trains teachers to become qualified teachers of visual impairment, and we have input into the program, and the teaching that I do is on cerebral visual impairment. So that's where my current research is around cerebral visual impairment. But to get there, it's interesting that you list all of these things as a checkered past. It probably is checkered in a way that it's not a linear story, right? And I think my very first project, I don't know if you remember this, Dave, was with Mariana Bulgins, and we did a project called Size Matters. And that paper looked at font size and reading speed in exam situations. And we found that size does matter, all right? And I think it was size 18 overall for low vision students was the optimal print size in exams. It was never taken up, but I think just having a paper called Size Matters as my first publication
provocative.
It's
a provocation. Well, just, I mean, on a serious note though, so what happens then if you go up from point size 18?
Well, what we found was that speed decreased and also comprehension decreased. So we were looking at speed and comprehension. If you start going further, then you get a de-acceleration or a relationship between the speed of reading, because it's bigger, right? And you have to turn more pages because this is print. And then the comprehension decreases as well because you're focusing on trying to get the overall on that print size.
So what's your reaction when you hear about somebody using, I don't know, point size 36 or something?
Yeah. I heard someone using print size 72, Dave, just the other day, right? Unbelievable. And, we both, Elizabeth and I, had a conversation about this, and we were saying, why on earth have they not started Braille, right? So,
we will come back to Braille in a little while. There are a few other projects that you've been involved with that are helpful, though. Just talk a little bit, if you would, about the journal.
Yeah, so I've been editor of the British Journal for 13 years now through SAGE, and this is the British Journal of Visual Impairment. And that's been a real interesting journey, getting all of the understanding of what's been happening. And I've opened up the journal more, so there's more input from African and Middle Eastern countries, looking at how their cultural differences impact on research and what kind of research they're doing. So I've done it for 13 years, but I suppose now, I guess on your podcast, I can publicly now say I'm now stepping down from being the editor of the journal. 13 years is a long time, and I hope by the time this podcast comes out, there will be new editors of the journal. So it's been a wonderful experience. I've hopefully increased the readership, and I've certainly increased the number of papers from around 60 papers a year to about 140, I think was the last count I had. So I've more than doubled the interest in visual impairment and research in that. So I'm pleased with what I've done, but it's over. It's over me, Dave.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's a huge body of work, right? And we probably need a large language model to help us interrogate it and learn about that. How do listeners access that content?
So type in the British Journal of Visual Impairment into any browser, you will find it. It has an online first system, so you don't have to wait for the hard copy. And so it is all digital. But unfortunately, it's a paywall system unless you know someone at a university.
Right, so people in academia may already be a subscriber to that.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Something else that you have spoken about publicly, although perhaps you're not directly involved, is this curriculum framework. Can you just explain for international listeners what the curriculum framework is and the angle at which you come at this work from?
Okay, so the curriculum framework for visually impaired people is really trying to understand, and for teachers themselves to get across exactly what is the role of the teacher of a child with a visual impairment. And it is like the expanded core curriculum, but I think it's much further than that. And it builds around what is an inclusive environment, how can we support children to be part of that inclusive world, and it has all these different elements around the curricula, and it really is a useful tool for others and for teachers themselves to understand exactly what their role is.
As we record this, we are at the Tactile Reading Conference 2025 in Amsterdam. Tell me what brought you here.
Well, not only am I in a lovely place in Amsterdam, and for the listeners here, I'm overlooking the central station with ferry boats going backwards and forwards, so that's quite nice. But I'm mainly here because obviously I'm interested in tactile and haptic perception, part of the research that I do, but I've also been presenting a body of work I've been doing with Lego Braille bricks. So presenting on how teachers in the US, the UK, France, Germany, Australia, Canada perceive the use of Lego Braille bricks in the teaching of Braille.
Are you able to share with us a little bit about those findings?
Yes,
I know you've presented this a couple of times now, so I don't think it's state secret.
No, it's not state secret, and the report's out on the Lego Foundation website if you want to see it. So we did a multi-method research program where we did surveys, and we asked over 500 teachers and practitioners of children with visual impairment about their perception of Braille, plus also we interviewed around 50 of them, as well as going to see schools and surveying children and speaking to children themselves. So we wanted to know where is Braille bricks being used in those countries, and how are they being used. And I think part of the take-home finding is quite interesting. And again, it goes back to what is the purpose of Braille. And the purpose of Braille for some children is obviously to develop literacy. And once you develop literacy, then you can have access to the full curriculum. And so unlike in some other countries, and I was discussing with a Ugandan colleague just now before I met you, Dave, is that over 90% of the 500 teachers use those Lego Braille bricks in a one-to-one environment with a child. So it's not this social, it's not this play activity together. It's a tool that is used to teach the child the code of Braille, and then to really, really do it as fast as they can, to learn that code as quickly as possible so they can develop their literacy and numeracy skills, and then to access standard Braille as fast as possible. So it's a kind of a tool that's used in this one-to-one environment rather than a social play thing where you imagine Lego would be. It's not that at all in these countries. So it's been quite interesting.
That is slightly different from perhaps the way in which Lego imagined the product to be used when it was developed.
Yes, I think it is, and I think it's that. I mean, if those involved in the education of children are not so surprised, because you're teaching Braille, right? The purpose is they're Braille bricks. They're there for a child to learn Braille, and so what happens certainly in the UK and in America, Canada, and Australia is that we generally teach Braille on this one-to-one process, right? And so that's how, if you're using Lego Braille bricks to teach Braille, then you're using them in that one-to-one environment. So it's an understanding of how Braille is taught in these countries, rather than thinking them as Lego, as an instrument of play, which is what I think the Lego Foundation initially, thought of their development with those bricks.
Okay, and you can go and read that report on the Lego Foundation website.
Yes, and hopefully the report of the research as soon as I get it written.
Excellent. What else have you found this week at conference that's kind of grabbed your attention?
Well, I really particularly like one of the sessions about understanding perception, haptic perception, and the orientation of through your body and through your hands, and how if you put your hands wide and spread across and open your arms as wide as possible, your haptic perception through your body representation is off. That was quite interesting because the children who I work with cerebral visual impairment, they already have a slightly off body perception. Because perception is really through where your body is and how your body is through space. And so if you increase your body perception out wider, it's going to be slightly off. But kids with dorsal stream damage have a real difficulty in mapping the world and how they map their body through their 3D space and into their world. So I found a lot of similarities with these simple haptic and tactile perception experiments with the children who I worked with CVI, and I thought that was quite interesting. So I'm going to go back to Scotland and get some children with CVI in and do these haptic tactile perception tests that were demonstrated this morning.
How do we tackle the challenge of introducing tactile literacy perhaps more effectively? Lego obviously have done a lot of work in this area. I, as you know, working a lot on Braille and tactile technology, but I know from my own experience as a blind person and speaking to other blind people that often when confronted with, say, a tactile diagram, you spend the first 5 minutes trying to figure out if you got the page the right way round, and not to mention, and then there's all the kind of complexity, and often tactile diagrams are often either too complex or not sufficiently complex. So there's some issues around the materials, but I think there's also some issues around training and how do we think about tactile first experiences. We heard a story this morning about a child being told not to lean out of their upstairs bedroom window because they didn't have a concept of how far away from the ground it was, and then the parent had got them to climb down a rope, I think it sounded like.
Yeah.
I was sort of thinking, well, didn't you just make a scale model or have a little figure or so you could understand those proportions? What are your thoughts around how we educate blind youngsters on the role of tactile diagrams and how to make best use of those?
Yeah, great question there. And I think part of that is getting either the teacher or the parent or peers to what I would call be in that right enabling condition of what it is to be that child with a visual impairment. So you're quite right. So one of the big issues that we know that is very difficult for a young child with a visual impairment is to understand height, shape and size and height, right? And we heard a story of how a person had a toy giraffe and didn't quite realize that giraffes have this huge, very long neck and it's almost about the size of a house when stretched up. And they were absolutely really taken by surprise in that. And I think part of that is because the teachers are not getting themselves in that enabling condition of what it is to be a child with a visual impairment. So part of that story is really, I think, about understanding what are we aiming to do. We're aiming to develop children who are able to understand shape, size, and compare those with other things. The example I always use with my students is an elephant and a mouse, Dave. What's bigger, right? Now, clearly the answer is an elephant, but there are many children out there who still won't know because the toys that we're given don't have that modifiers, right? You get a toy mouse, and then you get a toy elephant.
So that modelling is like physical modelling is
helpful, do you think, those 3D models?
I do in some sense, but I also think there's some experience. So we could go down to the Aristotle, we can go down to Locke, and is experience knowledge, and is knowledge only experience? And there's lots of philosophical debate about that, which I won't go into. But I do think there is some of that modeling that is essential. But with that modeling, you have to understand the scale and the size within that. So, and I think that's quite important. And sometimes we often forget that. It's just not sufficient to give you a model of a cow and give you then another model of an elephant, right? And so
you need to have had the experience of those things.
You need to have the experience of differencing in size.
Yeah.
Right?
I used to love. I think it was Patrick Moore in his books on astronomy would describe the relative sizes of celestial bodies in terms of cricket balls and marbles and things like that, and how far away they would be in relation to each other if they were to scale. And that stuff used to really...
And I think that's really important. So I think part of any training is to get that for the teachers, for the support assistants, and for parents, is to try and understand that it's very, very difficult to get that shape and size and scale if you can't see it. This is something that all sighted children perceive through that incidental learning just by looking around. They see an elephant is bigger than a mouse, right? But if you don't have that understanding of shape and size, then that has to be taught, right? That has to be taught.
The world is celebrating 200 years since the invention of the Braille code, and of course Braille has always evolved. The idea that Braille kind of remains static just isn't the case, because we often need new symbols and Braille appearing in new contexts, new devices. The tools and the language are all changing around us. Very exciting time just now. What do you think is the future for Braille? I mean, do we still need it in the age of Alexa? I mean, of course we do, but...
Yeah. I mean, again... So I'm really worried about Braille. I'm not worried about Braille itself, right? But I find that it's being used less, and I think it's being used less in schools. And I think there is some hesitancy from teachers as to whether, we talk about the size 36, N48, whether that child should start using Braille or do some pre-Braille skills or not. So I'm worried that some, not all, and I'm careful here, some professionals are turning to the assistive devices more than they should be turning to Braille. They should be using Braille much more than relying on sort of iPads and Alexa and things like that. I genuinely hope Braille will be around for another 200-400 years and so forth. There's no reason why it shouldn't be, because it's fantastic, it's excellent, it allows access to literacy and the great world of books. But I'm one of those worriers, Dave. I am worried that because some perceive it as difficult for the child to learn. Of course it isn't. They just have to be taught correctly, and there has to be an understanding of how to teach Braille, and I just see it being used less in schools, I'm afraid, Dave, and that worries me immensely.
The Tactile Literacy Conference 2025 was opened by Princess Laurentine, I probably got that wrong, apologies, of the Netherlands. Her Royal Highness spoke very eloquently, I felt, about the role of Braille for personal autonomy and independence and reading for yourself rather than being read to, and it was incredible for me to hear.
Oh, it's fantastic, wasn't she? She was so elegant about it. You're quite right. She was great.
And were only more public figures to speak in that way, it might go some way to getting that message across, that actually Braille isn't just about a few dots on paper. It can be very much about independence and opportunity
and agency.
Absolutely,
and all of those things. And I'm just going to question you just a little bit, Dave. I'm going to turn the tables around.
Yeah.
Clearly the princess had an understanding, right?
She did.
And so she had this understanding of what Braille can afford to do for those users. Now, I want that understanding more in those public figures. Rather than just speaking out, oh yeah, Braille's good, right? I want them to understand why it's good. Just like the princess here understood why it's good. And I think once you have that understanding, then of course you're going to speak out, right? But it's that understanding of what Braille can do for a reader. Just open up that, like you say, autonomy and agency and to the whole world of literacy rather than that passive production of listening is great. So I think what we need to do ourselves more, and maybe that's myself, that's you, Dave, as well, is try and put across the message more of what Braille affords rather than just being this coded system that was invented 200 years ago. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm celebrating 200 years with you, and we'll be going to a party tonight about Louis Braille and celebrating that, so absolutely. But I think it's what it affords the opportunities for all those Braille users that have it, how it opens up the world, and I think that's the message we need to get across, rather than, oh, here's some interesting code.
Well, Louis Braille himself was a musician and also developed a Braille music code, and your words, John, are certainly music to my ears. So thank you so much for your time, for your energy, for your provocations, which I think
there are many
very much needed. You know, I think yours is an important voice in our community, and I thank you for all that you do. Any parting thoughts? Where can listeners learn more about your work?
So if you look for the Scottish Sensory Centre at Edinburgh University, you will see me there. And also, if you're interested in cerebral visual impairment, you can search for me on YouTube, and as I have a YouTube channel dedicated to CVI on there. So just look me up, and please email me. I'm happy to talk to anyone and share my views and thoughts, and whether you agree with me or not, that's part of being an academic. So great.
Thank you so much, Professor John Ravenscroft of Edinburgh University. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
My thanks again to Professor John Ravenscroft and Joseph Stephen from Vispero for being our guests this time on Raising the Dots. If you like what you heard, then do like, subscribe and share the podcast with your networks. And if you'd like to get in contact, you can drop us a line, info@dottingcorp.com. That's info@dottingcorp.com. I've been Dave Williams, and until next time on Raising the Dots, bye for now.